Hi, I'm Staci Neustadt. I'm a CEO at Making Sense of Autism. I'm a speech language pathologist. I have our founder here, Susan Golubock. She is an autistic retired occupational therapist. I often have questions for Sue because I'm not autistic. I have ADHD, but I often come across challenges that I see other therapists come across. And this week it is about social communication. We do have a free checklist I'll link below called My Communication Strengths and Differences and or Challenges. And that's what we want to talk about this week, because we now know that autistic social communication looks different than non-autistic social communication. And oftentimes I'll see horrendous goals of talking about a non-preferred topic. And goals that are definitely not affirming, and we want to shift that mindset. That's why we created the checklist. So Sue, I would like for you to kind of educate us on how is autistic social communication different from non-autistic, and what do we do with students that we have who don't say they don't want friends, say they don't want to have conversation. Um, but we do know that conversation builds social connection, and it is human nature to want that social connection. So first, tell us, what are the difference in social communication?
Okay, let me disabuse you that autistics don't want friends. We desperately want friends. Um,
Mhm.
the problem that gets in the way is the communication part. So, because that's an essential part of, like you said, social networking and making connections is through verbal language. And yet that is at the core of our differences. And I'm sure you heard of the double empathy theory, that says autistics, when they're together, we show all the same characteristics because we communicate. It's like the French and the Germans. If they don't know each other's language, they're going to have difficulty communicating. They're going to be more comfortable with people that it's easy for them to communicate.
Mhm.
Now, talk about why is it difficult for autistics? Multiple reasons. Um, First of all, it can be a challenge for some of those that are non-speaking, um, to figure out, because of the sensory aspect of not knowing where their tongue is and how to move it to make sounds, and to articulate. They're going to have difficulty communicating, because communicating is work. Um, Even for me, just coordinating the breathing with speaking, I run out of air. I don't time it well. And so I can't continue a conversation for very long because I get exhausted. Um, then we've got those that are Gestalt language learners, and they learn things and they pick things up through frequent phrases that they hear in situations. So they see a situation and they hear the words, and then when they see a similar situation, they pull up those same words. We've memorized it. Well, that second situation may be similar, but it's not exactly the same. It may not be with the same person. And so we don't recognize that, okay, what worked with that person doesn't necessarily work with that person. And so that creates a problem, because now we're getting the first situation worked fine, the next one didn't. So we're getting negative reinforcement. So now we're confused and we don't know, should we try it again with a third person? Um, and so therefore now we are reluctant to engage in communication that didn't work. Then you've got the fact that many of us um, have very strong memory for details, and how we've learned language, the structure of it, um, uh, doesn't always agree with the way typical people like to use language. They like to use it very creatively. They have all these shortcuts and sayings that they use, and now we're lost because like poetry absolutely drives me bananas because they don't use language in the way that I learned language. So now what do I do when they're using words? I understand each of the individual words, but the way in which they put it together, it doesn't make any sense. And I've had many autistics say the same thing. I don't understand the way they put those words together, what they're talking about. So that interferes with communication because how can I communicate with you about what I don't know what you're talking about? And then you've got, if you put me into a situation of stress, I can know I'm in the emotional part of my brain. I can't easily shift to the language part of my brain. So I'm going to go silent. And I know many of very level 1 autistics that are very articulate and very verbal go silent on periods of stress because they can't easily connect to that area of the brain because they're in another area of the brain. You also have those that, because of the auditory processing, it takes them longer to process. They have to be able to figure out what it is you're saying before they can respond to it. And that processing time, if you don't give them enough time, you become impatient. Like you're not answering, so therefore I'm going to go on and say something else. Well, now you've lost me. I was just about ready to say something, and now you've moved on because I didn't respond in the time you expected me to. So do you see how many ways communication can break down between autistics and non-autistics?
Absolutely.
Which doesn't happen between autistic and autistics because our brains work very similarly. So those aren't major issues, but it is between autistics and non-autistics. So you've got that whole breakdown in multiple ways. And you have, if you don't understand the communication challenges that autistics are facing, then you're only making it harder for them to communicate.
Yeah. And is it important that, so you just listed kind of all the challenges that may occur. Do you think it's important as therapists that we explore those challenges so that our clients understand what's challenging for them in conversation?
Well, yes, obviously. The difference, you're not pointing out to them where they're deficient, but the difference between, because then now you're halting already. If you say you're deficient and here's how you're deficient from me, then of course I don't want to relate to you.
Absolutely.
You're making me feel bad about myself. But if you can talk about the differences, here's how my brain works, and here's how your brain works. So sometimes we have to make an adjustment so that we can meet somewhere in the middle. So I need to know from you what, and I've just been studying about boundaries. So we're talking about what your boundaries are in terms of, if I talk too fast, you need to let me know. If I'm using words you don't understand, or I'm using them in ways you don't understand, explore what their needs are in order to engage in conversation with you so that you have a better, and then let them know what you need from them and what's the best way that I can give them what you need in the way of communication.
I like that. Meet in the middle. That's perfect because you're right. I feel like as therapists, too often we fall into that trap of this is where you're deficient and what I'm changing or whatever, which is exactly what we're trying to shift away from. And instead of, hey, I have these challenges. What are your challenges? And how can we, support each other with it? I love that because then that teaches so many layers. That teaches that social communication piece. So you just kind of gave us some support ideas as well as the challenges. I have, and I'm glad you brought up that autistic individuals do want friends. because I guarantee there's a therapist listening out there, because I have heard it so many times in my career when I have a client who says, I don't want to have friends. So what do we do in that situation? Because again, we want to be respectful, but where do we even begin if they're so shut off because of the experiences they've had?
Well, that's just it. Making friends the way typical people make friends is too much work for us.
Mhm.
It's too hard. So no, we don't want to do it because it is, number one, it's confusing, it's overwhelming, it's too hard. So find out what's making it hard for us. And how can you help us make it easier to make friends? And I'm doing this with my autistic adult support group as well, looking at things like boundaries, being able to advocate for where my limits are,
Mhm.
what I need from you in order to be your friend. And then I want to in turn respect what you need from me. Um, Talking about what those challenges are and what our needs are and how we can support each other. That in itself is meaningful conversation,
Mhm.
because autistics are not going to put in that much effort and work into something that is so hard. And this is where small talk, which is, I understand, this is how neurotypicals tend to get to know each other. They take small little steps by talking about simple, easy things to talk about, feeling each other out. Um, we want to get right to the meat. And if we're going to spend energy, it's got to be on something meaningful. We're not going
Mhm.
to spend our energy talking about the weather or what movies you saw. Um, I'm sorry. You need to, if you want to communicate with us, then you're going to have to be on things that we find motivating to talk about. We're going to put forth the effort if it's really motivating enough for us.
Yes, identifying those shared interests. Awesome. Thank you, Sue. This is super helpful because I do think we don't think about how hard it is. And that could be where some of our clients and students just don't even want to breach the subject because adults have made it so difficult and almost not an exciting thing for them to do, especially when they've had goals in the past that make them have conversation or make
Mm-hmm.
them talk about non-preferred topics. So our goal of Making Sense of Autism is to shift this mindset, to shift and humanize autism and understand, which you've definitely provided us with a new lens today. So thank you very much.
Thank you for asking.
Mhm.